The Comey hearing fallout in Ohio. Joining us on Columbus on the Record this week, Karen Kasler, State House Bureau Chief for Ohio Public Radio and TV, Herb Asher, OSU political scientist, and Michael Miller, attorney and former Franklin County prosecutor. This week marked a key point in the story that has engulfed Washington and certainly will affect policy and politics here in Ohio. James Comey's testimony before the Senate Intelligence Committee continues to dominate the political discussion. Key part of that testimony involved a private meeting between Comey and President Trump, where they discussed the investigation into former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn. It comes down to the definition of the word hope. The fired FBI director said when President Trump said he hoped Comey would let the investigation go, it was more than wishful thinking.
I mean, this is the President of the United States with me alone saying, I hope this. I took it as this is what he wants me to do. Now, I didn't obey that, but that's the way I took it.
You may have taken it as a direction, but that's not what he said.
Correct. That's
he
what
said. He said, I hope.
Defenders of the president say hope is not an order, and they focused on another part of Comey's testimony.
Contrary to numerous false press accounts leading up to today's hearing, Mr. Comey has now finally confirmed publicly what he repeatedly told President Trump privately. That is, that the president was not under investigation as part of any probe into Russian interference.
Mike Miller, you're an attorney, defense attorney, you're a former prosecutor, you once worked for the FBI. What do you make of the interaction between President Trump and James Comey, if it happened as James Comey described it?
Well, if it happened as Mr. Comey described it, I think that the president is basically asking him to not do something he should be doing. Now, of course, the president denies that. Apparently, the best guess is we're not going to come up with any tapes or anything like that. So it all depends on who you choose to believe. I suppose even if the words that Mr. Comey said were totally accurate, reasonable people could draw different conclusions. So I don't think it's going to be anything definitive one way or the other. People who support the president are still going to support him regardless of what happens. People who don't are still going to be after him regardless of what happens.
If you were a defense attorney defending someone who said, I hope you take care of this, but don't order them to take care of it, would you be optimistic that it was not obstruction of justice?
Probably depends on what the charge is. I think it's a reach to call that obstruction of justice. I really do. Yeah. But then again, I'm no expert in that particular field. When you get to taking one word, I suppose years ago we came back with the thing that depends on the definition of is.
Yes.
I guess you want to come out. You're going to come out the way you want to come out.
Herbert, we started with A Place Called Hope with Bill Clinton, Keep Hope Alive with Barack Obama, now the definition of hope. What do you make of all this?
I think the key thing is this is just the first phase of an ongoing investigation that Mueller will actually be doing. And it's not limited just to the question, did the Russians interfere with the election? One of the things established yesterday, and nobody's denying, is the Russians really did indeed hack into the election. Now, what does that mean? It really meant they stole emails, they released disinformation or whatever. Nobody's saying that in any way did they affect the vote total on election day. Nobody's saying that, and we need to be clear about that. But they, in fact, the Russians have routinely been interfering in Western democracies for a long time. So this is a very serious issue. The president really has dismissed it. The real challenge here is, are there Trump associates who actually knew about this and had inside information about it? Did they in any way abet it? But I think, let me just say that I think actually this investigation is still going to go in other directions, and that is, are there any Trump associates or the president himself who were actually going to do things favorable to the Russians and harmful to the United States for whatever reason?
Karen, Ohio lawmakers, they were kind of quiet yesterday. From what I saw, only
they were all watching.
only Sherrod Brown released a statement, and even he didn't go after President Trump or James Comey. He just said, we hope we investigate the Russians to keep them from doing this again. And he mentioned the Ukrainian people in Ohio.
Right.
A little pander to them, but he didn't really get into the meat of the story there.
Right, and when I talked to him yesterday, because he was doing radio calls, as he's been doing since he is running for re-election, he wanted to talk about the Dodd-Frank bill and the changes to that. He really didn't have a whole lot to say, really, beyond and I honestly didn't ask him because I was working on other stories here. But you're right. I mean, the Republican Party put out a statement saying Democrats have selective amnesia when it comes to Comey. They put that out before the Comey testimony. And you had a couple of other things. Rob Portman put out a brief statement. But for the most part, I think the testimony kind of stood on its own. And people, like Mike was just saying, were making their own conclusions as they were going along.
Politics involved in federal prosecutions, Mike. Does it never happen? I mean, your experience, I mean, is there any political pressure on investigations, just that this one is up front and out in the open now?
Well, in my experience, there's, Mike, I don't know how you ever divorce, life from some political pressure. It's going to be there. I mean, the stuff I've done, I've never seen it because we're dealing with, gang murders and, theft of funds through, illegal fashion, that sort of thing. Now, when you get into investigating, using that word, or looking at the president or something, was politics involved in it? Is it ever involved? I think it's almost always involved to some degree. I mean, I think when President Clinton was impeached, there were politics involved. I mean, you look at it, and the Republicans did one thing, the Democrats went another way. And I find it very hard to believe that on every issue, the Republicans can stick together and vote one way, and the Democrats can stick together and vote another way. I just find it hard to believe these people on both sides actually believe their party is always right 100% of the time. It just, to me, that is politics. So there'll be some political pressure here. Whether it gets to the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Attorney General's office, I don't think that'll happen.
Well, and on NPR, the point was made that, even when Watergate started, it was considered a third-rate burglary, and look what happened. But the idea of impeachment, I mean, that's something probably for down the road for exactly the reasons you're talking about. I mean, Democrats would have to put these articles forward, and where would you get the Republican support to impeach Donald Trump?
Until there's Republican erosion in their support for Donald Trump, nothing will move forward. But again, this is just the beginning of the whole process. And I think for a lot of Americans who perhaps did not know who James Comey was, seeing him yesterday on TV, they probably said, he seems to be a very fair, judicious, and honest person.
But Democrats can't say that, can they? Because he doomed, they claim, Hillary Clinton.
But they can, on this issue, I mean, again, selective amnesia,
Yeah.
they can say, in fact, he's doing a good job on this, and they will.
Absolutely they will.
Yeah.
And certainly there were people who were critical of him yesterday as well. But, it was interesting to see him for the first time for a lot of people, I think.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, life goes on at the Ohio State House, but tax revenues are not making life any easier for state lawmakers. Income tax collections in May again failed to meet expectations set months ago. They came in $67 million short. That means the state has taken in about $840 million less than it projected. Officials say this year's state budget will be in the black, but the budget for the next 2 years, that's a problem, and the Senate is now looking for ways to cut hundreds of millions of dollars from the budget recommended by the governor and passed by the House. Karen Kessler, how are they going to come up with that money? First of all, what's going on with these projections? These were the projections that were made months, if not years ago.
Right.
Why are they off by so much?
That's a very, very good question. And when you look at the budget numbers for May, it's the personal income tax collections that are really leading the losses here, $89 million below estimates. Sales tax and commercial activity tax revenue were doing well, along with some other revenue. But then we still ended up with a $67 million shortfall for May, throwing the whole fiscal year, the current fiscal year, off by $841 million. Now, what you're referring to with the cuts, the House and Senate were supposed to cut $800 million from Governor Kasich's initial budget. The House cut about $632 million, according to Budget Director Tim Keene's estimate. That left about $168 million for the Senate to cut, and we heard the senators were not very happy about that.
They cut most of it, the House.
Well, but typically they like to have a document that's already balanced.
Let them be the bad guys.
So now we're waiting to see what the budget looks like from the Senate, which should come out early next week, and where the changes are going to be. And the House made some changes. They stripped out Governor Kasich's income tax cut proposal and a couple of other things. But the question now is school funding. Are there going to be some changes to school funding? Almost certainly. And some changes to Medicaid expansion. what the House did in terms of moving that money into the controlling board, basically requiring the governor's office to get permission to spend that money for Medicaid expansion every 6 months.
So where do the cuts come, Herb? Is it again local fund and school funding and?
The local fund has certainly been the target in the past. I think there's an awful lot of political pressure not to do that, because I think the local and the county governments have really let their members in the legislature know how unhappy they are. But one of the questions is, okay, now, because OBM and the state usually do a very good job in forecasting, and to be consistently off on one revenue source, even though unemployment is down and more people are working, leads people to question, even though they've denied this, that business tax cut that they did last year, they totally misestimated the impact of it, in part because they misestimated how individuals would change their behavior. Karen, you want?
No, you're right. I'm just following along with you. And the estimates that the budget office sent to me show that, yeah, the projected revenue estimates were even worse than what they've been. So they say that it's completely in line. But I think you're absolutely right. The question's about how people would adjust their
own
withholding.
Yes, exactly. And
Any chance of new taxes in the state budget, Mike? Republicans passing new taxes?
Not with Governor Kasich. I just can't believe that's in the offing. I don't know how they're going to cut it, Mike. They'll find some way to do it, but I would be stunned if they came up with new taxes.
But what Herb is saying is absolutely correct, that the budget office is saying very clearly, I mean, even without being prompted, that it's not the small business income tax cut that started 2 budgets ago that was phased in, and this is the first year that it's really been in full force, so to speak. They say it's right along with estimates, and that's not the reason why, but it's about $1 billion off, and here we are.
yeah, because if they said it was due to that set of changes, then of course there'd be great pressure to repeal those changes.
Exactly.
And some people would say, but that's a tax cut. And other people would say, no, that's reversing a bad decision that you didn't fully appreciate the consequences of.
And I think even conservative groups have even said, hey, maybe this is a tax cut that could be looked at again, because it is estimated to cost the state about $1 billion a year. And here we're $841 million short.
And nobody has talked about this yet, but I think, if I understand it correctly, some people are actually able to get their tax obligation almost to zero by, in fact, taking advantage of this opportunity. And then you start getting questions about, what about the fairness of the income tax system? Because not everybody can take advantage of that.
Anything you do that raise taxes, Mike. I mean, the Grover Nordquist tax pledge is what all the Republican candidates and office holders. It just really hamstrings policy, even if say a tax is not working as you expected, or it didn't work as you expected. You can't go back, otherwise you get nailed as being you're raising taxes. Or even if you let a tax cut that has a sunset provision that would automatically increase after 5 years, if you let it increase, then you get nailed with you're a tax hiker.
Well, I think it's true, Mike, and I just don't think a lot of people in the legislature have a lot of courage to do things that should be done, but they're afraid of what the election will be. The same thing with cutting entitlements. You know, nobody wants to do that. I'm sure that sitting down quietly in a room, you can probably get both sides to agree, yeah, we need this, but to do it and actually cut from somebody an entitlement, it takes some nerve, and I just don't think a lot of that's present.
And to have well-funded groups out there who are going to go after you,
Yes.
no matter what you do, makes it more difficult. But but I think, at least here in Ohio, if you really had the schools, the counties, the cities, everybody at the grassroots saying, wait a second, you can't let this situation get any worse, at least then you might provide some cover to put together, it's not going to happen, but I mean, put together a minimal majority to, in fact, remedy the situation. You don't need you don't need 80 people, you only need 50 votes in that.
All right.
And I wonder how closely anybody's watching what's happened in Kansas, where there's a big budget problem, and actually the legislature overrode the governor's veto of a particular solution here. So the legislature actually tried to fix it, is what I'm
Yes.
saying.
But they were a crisis.
Yes.
A lot worse
but
off than Ohio. We're not at quite the same crisis state that they are. So maybe that's what we need, Herb, a crisis.
Well, crisis gets people's attention.
Stuff gets done when there's a crisis. Another big health insurance company says it will not take part in the Obamacare exchange program in Ohio. Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield says it will pull out at the end of the year. The company cites the shrinking individual market and continual changes in federal rules and guidance. Republicans like Pat Tiberi say it proves Obamacare is collapsing. Democrats like Sherrod Brown blame Donald Trump and House Republicans in Washington for sabotaging Obamacare and creating uncertainty. Herb Asher,
There's an element
who's
of truth.
right?
There's an element of truth to both, meaning that everybody acknowledged that Obamacare needed changes. Certainly Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton all said that. Many Democrats said that. So Obamacare really did need changes. But the Republican strategy now has really been to actually do in Obamacare and create maximum uncertainty, make it unclear about how much we're going to provide by way of subsidies. Part of Obamacare was people got subsidies from the federal government in order to be able to afford insurance. That made the insurance companies more willing to, in fact, offer policies. The subsidies are, in fact, now sort of in question. If you're an insurance company, you hate uncertainty. So how do you respond to that? You either get out of the market or you raise prices so that you cover your, your maximum losses if that were to happen. Interesting little story in North Carolina. They said, we would have had, the insurance companies, we would have had about an 8.8% increase in our premiums, which is already a fairly good thing, but fairly big, I should say. But they said with all this uncertainty, we're now offering 22%. And the administration and the Republicans really some Republicans like that because it actually speeds the demise of Obamacare. If you have if you have health care coverage, but you can't afford it, or the subsidies aren't great enough, or the deductibles are so great because of the kind of policies insurance companies feel they need to offer, then in fact you don't really have.
You pay the tax penalty. Are the tax penalties high enough, Karen? Why isn't the individual market shaping up as they had hoped or expected?
I don't know. These are good questions. And I think right now the question is, looking ahead to 2018, this is going to be a big deal. And what happens in the next couple of months with regard to the marketplace here in Ohio is going to be a big deal for next year's elections. I mean, the entire U.S. House is up for election next year. If there isn't a solution here, are they going to be punished? The Republicans who run the House, are they going to be punished? And if the Democrats don't have a solution, what's going to happen to them?
Yeah, one of the things that was supposed to encourage people to go into the individual market was, in fact, there was a penalty. Well, in fact, that penalty is not really being very well enforced, and in fact, the Trump administration has said to the Internal Revenue Service, go light on that. Well, okay, again, that's a demonstration of trying to, in fact, undermine the arithmetic that underlies the Obamacare. But Obamacare did need tweaking, and now, in fact, I think what you're really seeing here is efforts to really make it even worse than it was.
All right. Our last topic, the cities of Dayton and Lorain this week announced they will join the state in suing drug companies for their role in the opioid crisis. Announcing the lawsuit was Nan Whaley, the mayor of Dayton and also a Democratic candidate for governor. Dayton has been hit hard by the crisis with nearly 350 fatal overdoses already this year. This lawsuit goes further than the one filed by the state and likely Republican candidate for governor, Mike DeWine. The Dayton and Lorain lawsuit goes after distributors, including Dublin's Cardinal Health, as well as manufacturers. Ohio's suit, filed by Attorney General DeWine, only goes after the manufacturers. Karen Kassler, so now both cities and state are going after the drug companies.
Drug companies, drug distributors, and also some doctors who were working with these groups to kind of give some, I guess, some credibility. I mean, the claims of the lawsuits here are that the addictive nature of these medicines was greatly downplayed, and that doctors prescribed them in large numbers. When patients were cut off, they perhaps went to pill mills, which the state shut down largely, but then people ended up turning to heroin and other opioids. That's a cheaper option for a lot of people, and it's now a deadly option. I mean, the Columbus Dispatch just did a report a week or so ago. More than 4,000 people last year, 11 people a day. The state numbers will come out in a couple weeks. But now we've got a crisis point here. You want to talk about a crisis in terms of how do communities, local communities, and the state fight this? I mean, there's law enforcement issues to deal with. There's public issues to deal with in terms of children's services, and even food banks are feeling this. And Attorney General Mike DeWine was in Congress this week. While everyone was watching Jim Comey, he was actually testifying with a panel about the opioid crisis and saying that one of the other after effects here is that people are not able to get jobs because they can't pass drug tests.
Mike Miller, one of the things is the balance between enforcement and punishment versus treatment. Where do you think the where should most of the resources go? Is it to the treatment, or is it to the law enforcement and prevention side?
Well, I think it's to the treatment, Mike. But back to the suit itself. There's a wonderful book, I think it was written last year, called Dreamland.
Yep.
Yes.
And I think every prosecutor, every defense attorney, and every judge ought to read it. And to me, the pharmaceutical companies are the ones to blame for this.
That's what the
They
book-
pushed it and pushed
the
it
book
and pushed
describes,
it.
yeah.
They kept telling the doctors, not the crazy doctors who are going out with pill mills making millions, reasonable doctors who for years and years were very limited in what they did so far as prescriptions. And they kept telling them over and over they had these studies and you got to take care of pain, it's not addictive. And there's all kind of proof for this in this book. This is not some, crazy guy writing this. And the tragedy is unbelievable. We've lost more than we lost in Vietnam. It's the greatest cause of death, I think, now for people under 40. It's just unbelievable. And I think it goes to treatment to begin with, but treatment is very difficult because these people that are addicted to this, it is their life.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, and one of the challenges here, I mean, you can certainly, if somebody overdoses, you give them injections of so you save their life, but meanwhile, they're still addicted.
Yes.
And you don't solve addiction by a 1 week kind of intervention.
And we've seen, Herb, where the people that give that Narcan or whatever
Yeah.
have said many times they've had the same person twice. I saw one guy said 3 times in one 24-hour period.
Yeah.
So they die, they bring them back to life, so to speak,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they go right out and overdose again.
And so the question, does the state of Ohio and do communities actually have the capacity, the beds, the personnel to in fact handle this large volume? And many people are arguing here's a case where actually more monies are needed to in fact handle that kind of patient load.
Any chance they dip into they always talk about this rainy day fund for crisis situations. Some people in the legislature are saying that John Kasich should dip into this savings account the state has to fund some of these
I
things.
think he said very clearly, he's very reluctant to do that because there's a concern about what's going to happen halfway through the budget. You don't want to have to make budget cuts halfway through the 2-year budget cycle, and he wants to reserve the rainy day fund for that. But this whole idea of treatment, I mean, there's a drug that does help with treatment. It takes 16 weeks, though, of monitored treatment. That's a lot of time, and the bed space is for many people not available, in many areas not available. And I know that Sherrod Brown and Rob Portman, our U.S. senators, are working on a bill to raise the bed cap from 16 to 40. But still, where's the money? Where's the money going to come from?
And
Then you find out that there's an organization here in Central Ohio that's trying to add beds, but they won't release where they're going to put the facility because they're going to run into neighbors' concerns.
Yes, yeah.
So it's not an easy solution to
And
anything.
this gets tied into Medicaid expansion, which covers actually treatment for a substantial number of people who have problems with addiction.
And remember this, we need the acquiescence of the addict.
Yeah.
Yes.
You just can't force these people in and take them this 16-week course or whatever. They've got to want to do it.
Well,
And
but
I'm
if-
afraid a lot of them don't want to do it.
If the option is do that or jail,
Well, I'm not sure what they'd take.
yeah, it's a real issue.
Yeah, and addiction it's incredibly hard to beat. Let's get to our final off-the-record parting shots. Mike Miller up first.
Well, I don't have a real parting shot. I do think the announcement that Ohio State's hired a new basketball coach today from Butler is going to be a shot in the arm. I have nothing against the previous coach. I'm not that big of a basketball fan, to be honest, but I think this guy is going to be a credit to the university and will help them at a time they need it.
All right. Herb.
The Comey testimony is simply the first round in a lengthy process.
And Karen.
On Monday, ECOT, the Electronic Classroom of Tomorrow, the state's largest online charter school and the 9th largest school district in the state, if you wanted to count it that way. There's a vote in the State Board of Education to force ECOT to pay a $60 million back to the state for about a 9,000 student enrollment boost that ECOT said they had, that the State Department of Education says they didn't, and a local judge also said they didn't. ECOT says, though, they're not ready to settle this. They want to litigate it all the way. And I think there are a lot of us who are going to be watching legislation, the budget, just to see if there's any sort of efforts to try to help ECOT in this battle.
All right. And in the spirit of debates that never seem to go away for very long, I do predict if the Cavaliers season ends, which it might soon, perhaps even this weekend, or tonight even, that speculation will turn to will LeBron James buy out or get out of his contract and leave Cleveland to go play for another super team. So he probably won't, but the debate will happen. That is Columbus on the Record for this week. Continue the discussion online, Facebook, Twitter, and our website, WOSU.org. For our crew and our panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.